Good morning, and thank you all for being here in person and via the live stream. Just to get a point of personal privilege is to take care of it right up front. Go Phillies. Before we begin with a moment of silence, I'll just state the obvious. It is well beyond my calling to suggest what each person should reflect upon, especially at a time of such fear, anger, and anguish in our world. I'll just share my hope amid the evil of terrorism and the horror of wars, as our hearts break with those who suffer and grieve, the hope that we can still envision and work toward the world we want for our children. Please join in a moment of silence. Thank you, friends. As we begin this morning, we acknowledge that the state of Delaware is comprised of lands vital to the web of life for Lenape and Nanticoke, who share a future as well as ancestry and history in our state. And we begin with thanks to the leaders in government and across all sectors who have contributed to 5 years of progress toward Delaware's identity and agency as a trauma-informed state. Special thanks to those participating in our roundtable. I won't introduce you because that will happen later. But I do want to thank you for your effective and inspiring leadership and your very generous partnership in this work. I especially want to acknowledge our youth advocates, Maida Barrios and Zach Bernard, and tell you a little bit about why I admire them so much. Many of you have heard me talk before about how my own life was upended by unaddressed trauma. As a child, I was shy and sensitive and also very, very fortunate. I had good health and married, economically secure parents who were not violent and who wanted me to succeed. When I was about 10 years old, I saw my father badly injured in an accident at home. It wasn't life-threatening, but at the time, it sure seemed like it was. Lots of blood, lots of panic. And in that strange way that a young mind can assume omnipotence, I felt the accident had been my fault, that I had done something wrong, and that's why it happened. For years afterward, I was afraid of making a mistake. And my response was to go into hyperachievement mode, an expression of distress that, absent good information, can be very hard to recognize. And no matter how much I managed to achieve, I never felt good enough. And every failure or even suboptimal achievement was devastating. That re-traumatization continued until, as a sophomore in college, I could no longer sit through a class, could no longer do my homework, could no longer get myself out to the practice field. And mine, by any objective standard, was a minor trigger of a trauma. But my life was completely upended, again, not so much by what happened, but by a lack of information about how to understand and to respond to my experience of what happened. Excuse me. And I have no doubt that had my family not had health insurance, had my parents been incarcerated or unemployed, had my context been more inclined to judge me and less inclined to offer me a chance, I would not have recovered to grow beyond trauma. When I look at Zach and Maida and the many young people they speak for, I see how much more they've had to deal with than I did. And I see something else too. I remember when my life started to settle down and I could really start thinking about the future. I said, give me 5 years and I'll be an advocate. It took me 30 years. Maida and Zach are advocates. Advantage. And I recognize myself right down the list of health consequences of chronic stress, of trauma that goes unaddressed for too long. Hypertension, cardiovascular concerns, gastrointestinal problems, sleep disorders, autoimmune issues, and I'm lucky. Those things are not suicide, addiction, incarceration, or death before middle age. I mention such tangible consequences of unaddressed trauma only to emphasize, based on both research and my direct experience, that this stuff is not theoretical, not abstract, not academic. And what we can do about it, to recognize it, to mitigate it, to prevent it, is just as real and consequential. We've come a long way in 5 years, and we're just getting started. Thanks again for being here, for your continuing good work. Here, we're going to start with a brief video, about 9 minutes, to get us started. Thank you.
Trauma. When we hear that word, we usually think of a scene from a hospital drama, or veterans and PTSD might come to mind. But those examples are only the tip of the trauma iceberg. Trauma is defined as an emotional response to abnormal circumstances or terrible events. In Delaware, trauma impacts the lives of over half of the state's population. Untreated trauma is a public health issue with far-reaching branches into our communities. The first step to tackling a problem of this magnitude is awareness.
So the value of trauma awareness is that everyone in communities throughout Delaware is aware of how trauma impacts our brain, our bodies, our emotions, and our responses to things that occur to us.
You know, it took me quite some time to really understand the prevalence, the impact of trauma, and it's been a symbolic journey because I think sometimes it requires a diverse approach. It requires a full court press, if you will, in terms of ongoing messaging and information that sets the tone and foundation for humans to change or to move their particular perspective from left to right or A to B. So it happened to me as well. I think awareness is the critical aspect of behavioral change with anything. In this concept of trauma and understanding the importance and the role of trauma, mental health and trauma has an incredible stigma to it. So when people typically hear those words, it comes with a negative tone. So the awareness piece has to be a critical tone in terms of inspiring change.
Untreated trauma changes how a person copes and adapts to their world. Long-term effects can range from mild to severe and manifest both physically and mentally. These responses to untreated trauma may include symptoms like headaches, fatigue, digestive complications, while the emotional symptoms range from anxiety, sleep disorders, and depression to substance abuse and emotional dysregulation. It results in poor socioeconomic and health outcomes for individuals that the CDC estimates cost hundreds of billions annually.
Trauma and the experience of trauma, the reactions people have to experiencing trauma, affects everybody. Even if you yourself haven't experienced a traumatic episode, you are with people who have. You know people who have. You work side by side with people who have experienced trauma. The question that we always have is, how has that person adapted to the experience of trauma and the stress it's created? Sometimes those reactions end up creating more problems. Sometimes we say, hurt people hurt people.
So for the ordinary person driving through a community and seeing high rates of obesity among children or among adults may think those people just eat poorly. Obesity, which is a common chronic disorder in a lot of impoverished communities, people think those people are just lazy, or they don't have the knowledge of how to eat properly.
Individuals and organizations that are equipped with the tools to help those who have suffered trauma can work to help those people build the resilience they need to move forward and to live the life they were meant to live.
I think what we have to acknowledge about trauma awareness is that it is a basic standard of care. This is not an add-on. This is not an extra thing. This is a 21st century basic standard of care. Trauma-informed care is informed care. This is like knowing somebody's blood type. This is like knowing if somebody has diabetes. This is that kind of level of care. You cannot serve people well, whether they are children in school or clients at a state service center or your employees in a private business. You cannot serve people well if you do not have a significant level of being trauma-informed.
In 2013, Governor John Carney passed Executive Order 24, which declared Delaware a trauma-informed state. The order called for state employee training, data collection on adverse childhood experiences, trauma-specific language in state service contracts, a community-wide self-care toolkit, a trauma awareness month, and more.
Well, policy is essential, regardless of who is setting it. So you could be talking about legislation, you could be talking about court decisions, you could be talking about executive actions. All of these set an expectation and a context that other people then respond to. So for example, Governor Carney's Executive Order number 24 sets an expectation that state employees will become aware of the impact of trauma and will pay attention to the experience and the history of trauma and the people they serve.
Trauma Matters Delaware has been started out as a very informal network of people interested in this subject and grew to have an email list of more than 1,000 people. This is an all-volunteer, very informal organization that really was, I think a lot of the founding ideas for a trauma-informed state started with Trauma Matters Delaware and also with the Trauma-Informed Schools Network. So there was an informal network and some things operating independently of each other long before John Carney, our beloved governor, and I came on the scene. I think Executive Order 24, which set the goal of Delaware being a trauma-informed state, catalyzed that informal movement into a formal movement. And that's when social contract was brought in to help the Family Services Cabinet Council organize these things from the state, from the government perspective, and also to help the private sector and the nonprofit sector to bring everybody together, sort of rowing in the same direction on this initiative. I think the executive order was crucial. I think that government needs to lead with itself and not just ask other people to do things. And I think also the structure of the Family Services Cabinet Council was crucial. Our First Chance initiative, which is the first spouse initiative in Delaware, that's basically designed as a parallel to the Family Services Cabinet Council. The whole idea of that is to get people out of silos and get everybody who deals with children and families talking to each other, knowing what each other's doing, sharing objectives, and First Chance is modeled on that. So I think Trauma Matters Delaware, that informal network, the trauma-informed schools work, which had, again, a national partner, all that coming together with the Family Services Cabinet Council and the executive order, then social contract coming in as an agent kind of structure. All that together got us going.
In partnership with Social Contract, Trauma Matters Delaware serves as a hub in advancing the collective effort to prevent and heal trauma. Through coordination, education, and advocacy with government, public, private, and other nonprofit organizations, we are working towards a Delaware where all people can feel safe, grow beyond adversity, and thrive. Everyone, my name is Alana Berry. I serve as the Director of Community and Family Services in the Governor's Office and as the state's first statewide trauma-informed care coordinator. I am so excited for all of us to be here today to talk about all the work that's been happening since the executive order, but also the work that was happening before the executive order. In true Delaware fashion, this work started from conversations at a brouhaha, right, of people who cared about what happens to other people and talking about how we can work together regardless of organization, regardless of association, to make Delaware a better state. And that work transformed into, as you've heard, Governor Carney's Executive Order 24, that named that Delaware will become a trauma-informed state, named actions around how we do that. It catalyzed the informal group of Trauma Matters Delaware, formalizing to be a backbone to support this work in our state externally, and also catalyzed internal structures and roles in our state government to support our state agencies in lifting off this work, and to have accountability around it. How do we track this? What are the metrics? How do we know we're successful? What does it look like when we're seeing change for the better in our state? And so that's really what today's conversation is going to be about. You're going to hear about the different initiatives that exist in our state. You're going to hear about how agencies have been making change, what that looks like for them. And hopefully you're going to hear about how excited we all are to continue this work moving forward. It's not tied to a particular administration. It wasn't tied to an administration before, right? This is work that's been catalyzed by a leadership that says it matters, but it's going to continue to happen, and it's going to continue to move forward after any administration. And so really excited for our time today. I just want to share a brief history added on to the video. After Executive Order 24, and you'll see as the slides are going across the screen, the question then became, what do we do? How do we become a trauma-informed state? We've got a lot of people who are interested in this. We have a lot of people who have expertise, but what does it actually mean for an entire state to become trauma-informed? We were the first state in the nation to have any sort of executive action around trauma-informed care. And I would say since 2018, there's been updates in research. There's been a lot of other states who have, whether it be from a department level or from a university level or from a whole state level, who are trying and pushing this work forward, and they've been partners with us in this work since then. But Delaware really took the first step in trying to understand what this all means and how you do it. And so the first thing that happened in our state was going out and talking to the people who had been doing the work for a long time. And that's really where our blueprint came from. And so we released a blueprint in 2019 that laid out specific actions that we needed to take as a state to start this work of becoming trauma-informed. All of that came through collaborative sessions, which many of you were a part of, where we tested ideas and we tested concepts, and we said, does this make sense? How do we engage different sectors of the community in this work? How do we make sure that we're respecting different cultures when we talk about trauma-informed care, right? And so that's where our blueprint came from. Then we began the work of engaging our state agencies and internally in state government. As you heard our First Lady say, the government has to lead in this work. And so we took that on and went out to the agencies that sit on the Family Services Cabinet Council and conducted strategic planning sessions. For many of the agencies, they, again, had been doing this work for a long time, right? Maybe we didn't call it trauma-informed care, but in our schools, in our children's department, in our Department of Health and Social Services, this work had been happening. But there were other agencies who, I remember a session with the Housing Authority where at the end, someone came to me and said, I didn't know this is what was happening. Like, you gave me the word to describe what's been happening and what I've been seeing in the communities that I've been working with. And I think that's the story of Delaware, which is we were all in different places. And so having a plan around how we become trauma-informed was really critical to kind of moving the ball forward in our state for this work. So we released a progress report in 2019 that laid out what agencies were doing to commit to this work. For some agencies, that looked like doing an environmental scan of their space. I remember the Department of Labor saying after their session, I realized that every building, no is everywhere on the wall. No phone, no standing, no this. We took all those signs down, right? Because that's not an inviting and welcoming space for people. And we had other agencies who, again, were much further along in thinking about what does this mean for our frontline staff? What does it mean to be trauma-informed when you answer the phone, right? If a constituent is calling you. What does it mean to be trauma-informed when we think about back-end processes, like sharing information, asking people to tell their story over and over again to different staff members? How can we minimize the impact of that trauma on folks? And so we've been working hard since then with each of our agencies. I think that COVID shed light on what we were doing and shed light on why it matters. And so now that we're 5 years later, we're now thinking about what the future looks like in our state. And so with that, we will turn to our panel to hear a little bit more about what's been happening in each of your spaces. And so first, just want to say thank you all for coming. And to get things started, just want to go around the semicircle here to introduce yourselves. Please just share your name, a little bit about what you do and your connection to Delaware's trauma-informed care work. So I will start with Erin.
Good morning. My name is Erin Mitchell, and I'm the founding executive director for Trauma Matters Delaware.
Good morning, everyone. I am Deb Berkey. I'm Director of Psychology Programs, and I also direct the Center for Prevention Science at Wilmington University. And I've been part of Trauma Matters Delaware since 2017, 16, somewhere in that range, so about the last 7 or 8 years. And I currently serve on the board of the newly created 501c3 Trauma Matters Delaware.
Good morning. Sorry. Good morning, everybody. My name is Zach Bernard. I'm a student at Delaware State University, and I'm a youth advocate.
Good morning. I'm Terry Lawler, Education Associate for Trauma-Informed Practices and Social and Emotional Learning at Delaware Department of Education and Project Director for Project Thrive, Delaware's Trauma Recovery Demonstration Grant.
Good morning. I'm Susan Conley. I'm the Director of Community Health for Delaware Department of Correction. I'm actually new to the semicircle. I was granted to be the state employee for trauma-informed care this year.
Good morning. My name is Steve Yateman. I am the current secretary for the Children's Department. In that department, we work with children involved in the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, and the prevention and behavioral health system.
Good morning. My name is Daniel Walker. I am the Deputy Cabinet Secretary for the Department of Health and Social Services. Our service group division that includes our Division of Child Support Services, Division of Social Services, and our Division of State Service Centers, which are the front line and entry point to a lot of the services we offer in the state of Delaware.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna dive right in, and this question is for multiple panelists. I would say Erin, Susan, Zach, feel free to respond, but just talk about your personal introduction to trauma. When was the first time you heard about trauma or trauma-informed care? Why don't we start with Zach?
I would say the first time I've heard of trauma, it had to be in middle school. I want to say it was really talked about more during COVID time. I feel like during COVID time, we allowed ourselves to have a isolation and separation time period, which allowed us to develop a conversation for more of what we're thinking about and how we see things. So I really feel like the conversation of just trauma and what that really means and in depth, should I say, really started like during COVID time. Before that, I've heard of PTSD, which was related to, the Army and different things like that. But I never really took a deeper look into it until I would like to say like 4 or 5 years ago. And I would say the same about trauma informed.
Thanks, Zach. I don't want to admit this, but I will. So the very first time I heard of trauma-informed care was before I came to Trauma Matters Delaware. I was working for a school district, and it was a professional development day, and someone said they were going to have a speaker come in and talk about the brain. And I motioned, everyone has that person when you're doing professional development, you can connect eyes with them, and you can be like, either this is going to be great, or this is going to be boring, or whatever your thoughts might be. And I motioned to one of my friends in the audience. I was like, I wanted to go back home and go in my bed and go to sleep. And I learned so much that day that I really just think if I had missed that day, if I had crawled back in bed and said, you know what, it's going to be a sick day instead of a professional learning day, I would have missed out on a great opportunity to learn about brain science. And that was about 2015, 2016.
Much like the video, my definition or my thoughts of trauma were from an acute care aspect as working in healthcare for 20 plus years. So that was my experience with the word trauma. It wasn't until I was a new state employee in the year of 2018 that the verbiage trauma-informed care came out, and I'm like, oh, okay. And to no surprise to probably anyone in the room, we've experienced a lot of trauma in Delaware Department of Correction over the past several years. So that was my introduction to trauma-informed care from a different lens.
Thank you. I'd love to hear from Secretary Yateman and Deputy Secretary Walker just about, from the agency perspective, why is becoming trauma-informed important to your agency to invest in?
Thank you for that question. Can I speak to the other one first?
Sure, of
I did
course,
want to, right? Because
Yeah.
They reminded me of something. So in our department, we obviously provide services to children and families, much like Daniel's department. So we've had the trauma-informed sort of framework prior to 2018, but it wasn't nearly as invested in as a state, so it's huge. But I want to say, before I even knew really what trauma was, new employee to the state, casual seasonal employee working at Ferris School, one of the toughest places, for a kid to be, right? Two very traumatic things for a kid to experience is moving from their home and being separated from their parent, right? And when you come into a detention facility, both of those things happen regardless of the situation that got you there. So I had a really great psychologist. When I say I had him, he was well above me, but he was my mentor, so I got him. He's mine, right? And he would say things after he watched you interact with a child, right, or a kid, he'd be like, yo, Yateman, you messed that one up. Like, you should have done this, right? And that feedback was perfect. But one of the things he said that was very trauma-informed that I didn't view in that lens at the time, he's like, Yateman, every one of these kids had a dream when they were 4 or 5. It wasn't to be here. And he said, it doesn't matter if it's an unhoused person, a person dealing with a mental health issue. They looked up to the sky and wanted to be an astronaut. They looked at a movie and wanted to be an actor. They didn't want to be where they are now. And that was really the first entrance for me into that kind of a thinking. And I'll always be indebted to Dr. Denker for that. His name was Dr. Michael Denker. He was just an awesome guy, and he helped me learn things. But to get back to your question of why it's important to view through a trauma-informed lens in our work, for us it's really twofold. First is our children and families. No one comes into our department on a great day, right? They just don't, right? It's still somewhat of a reactive system, except we're able to do really good prevention work. But folks come to us having experienced adversity, having experienced trauma, a lifetime of it, regardless of if they're 6 or 44. They have a lifetime of these experiences that we need to acknowledge when we start to work with them. The second part is our employees. They also have a lifetime of experiences, some with adversity, some with trauma. They also, in working with these families, vicariously accept some more trauma into their lives. It's up to us, and it's incumbent upon us as a department to develop, trauma-informed policies to make sure everything from a desk manual that our workers use working with families to the policies that dictate how our HR practices work are trauma-informed. At the end of the day, we need to make sure as a department that we're presenting an environment that is safe and supportive for all the children, all the families, and all of our employees.
So I'll start by saying my first acknowledgement of trauma did not come from something I learned in school or something I learned through conversation, came through a TV show, and it was associated with physical trauma. I watch a lot of Grey's Anatomy. And that was my thought. I was like, wow, that's special. Came from my uncle who was in the military, and I heard my grandmother say one time, we really should get you checked out to see if you're experiencing PTSD. It was only associated with the military. But as someone who went through life in homeless shelter after homeless shelter, in communities with the prevalence for drug and substance use, and walking to school and seeing someone who's shot on the train tracks right here in Dover, I had no idea that each of those encounters was compounding trauma in my own life. And so that's the lens in which we at the Department of Health and Social Service have tried to get our employees to look at the work we do. And through the lens of, we're not just serving Delawareans, we're not just serving our clients, but what we are doing is helping folks reverse and address the effects of their own personal experiences. So at the Department of Health and Social Services, as I stated, we are the entry point to a lot of services across our state. We, much like Secretary Yateman have said, when people come into our doors, they're coming into our doors not because everything is okay, but because they have an issue that they want addressed and solved. And it's our job to do that. That is why we are here. So our clients, first and foremost, drive why we do this. And every time we're in a meeting with how we're going to move towards a more trauma-informed place, we're looking at the impact of our clients. What would our clients experience? We're also looking at it through the lens of our staff. We have intentionally and purposefully hired individuals to represent the communities in which they serve. And so they come with their own levels of trauma as well. And the team will be the first to tell you when we're doing our trauma-informed training, it's sort of an aha moment for the staff, because before we can get to how you address clients, they start to realize, I've been traumatized myself. And so it is a very long and intentional training, because we have to get the acknowledgement of our own trauma out of the way. And it's never completely gone. You always understand it. You always know it. It's understanding how you put it into action, how it drives you to move towards the client. So some things that we do, because it has been very important in our department, we actually monitor how many people go through our trauma-informed approach training. And it's something that we ask questions on daily. We put plans in place for when certain individuals get behind. We want to make sure that everyone is moving forward in that training. We also look at all of our policies through that lens, not just internal policies, but external policies. We handle the Medicaid program, we handle the SNAP program, we handle the TANF program, and most recently, one of the things we have done is lifted our TANF cap rate for Delawareans, because we're saying it was a archaic practice that was rooted in past years of racism, and we as a department said we can no longer do that, because people need help. We should not penalize you for needing help. We should be helping you to get more self-sufficient. And so we look at metrics across the board: how many people are completing the training, the cadence for our training, how our policies are trauma-informed internally and externally. And then also what we're doing right now is we're going to be putting in place a feedback loop for our clients to tell us what their interactions with us are. They naturally do it already. Trust me, my email and phone goes off and we get the insights, but we want to formalize that process so we can understand the experiences that our clients and our staff are having, so that we can help gear our approach with that information.
And this can be to anyone, because you all lead teams. Oh, sorry. This can be to anyone because you all lead teams. What does it mean to be a manager of teams, a leader, and how do you do that through a trauma-informed lens? And for me, that could look like, when a staff has a personal trauma, which happens all the time, or as Secretary Yateman talked about, the vicarious trauma that happens just by us doing our jobs every day.
So I'll say this and then stop. As a manager, as a department, we have over 4,000 staff members in the Department of Health and Social Services. We are by far the largest organization and the front-facing organization for the state. And what it means as a manager to lead through trauma is sometimes recognizing that it's going to go a little slower than you would like. We oftentimes want things done immediately. Right? That's the nature. We like the client needs this, the boss needs that. Sometimes you need to work through that with people. And I often say how I address people's trauma is through transparency. It's not always telling you, it's not only telling you what we're doing, but understanding the why behind it is important in terms of transparency. And so once you can have that conversation with your team members, and I call them team, I don't call them staff or employees. When together, we're really a team because I'll take out the trash just as soon as the next person will. It's understanding the why you have to do things and then having a conversation on how you get there together.
I'd like to respond to that because I think it takes a great deal of reflection. One of the things that we've even talked about among this group is the power of practicing or putting into practice what we advocate for and preach to others. And so in the Department of Ed, often we say we want to go slow to go fast, that you really can't jump over the steps. You have to build awareness. You spend some time in self-reflection so that you can build your own sensitivities and then start responding. And many times, often, I think our hearts want to jump into the response, but without those foundational pieces in place, it's really hard to do that because that foundational work around awareness and building sensitivity is what really helps us implement the policies in ways that not only make sense, but also meet the needs of those that we serve.
So, Susan, I will pivot the next question to you. Since the Department of Corrections has started the work of becoming trauma-informed, what changes have you noticed in the department itself?
I will say awareness. Awareness is huge, and you just mentioned that. I'd like to reflect on what these folks over here also alluded to. Everyone has some sort of trauma. That people come into our building also on not their best day. So our staff have to interact with these folks, but it's awareness. There has been a plethora of education and trainings that have been instituted with DOC over the past several years to make people understand that you don't have to continue to have that hard, crusty exterior. It's okay to not be okay. We have folks that will help you work through this. And it's that identification, the awareness. Repetition is the mother of education, and we have lots of trauma-informed pieces built into our training programs for brand new recruits. As soon as they come in, there must be at least 6 of the trainings that they will go through in the classroom, as well as interaction where trauma-informed pieces are identified and brought to the forefront. But I truly believe that it's awareness, and also knowing that it's not a weakness. It's not a weakness, and I say patients because they're patients to me. Other people might call them offenders, they might call them inmates, incarcerated persons, but to me they're patients because I'm from the healthcare aspect. They experience trauma, our staff experience trauma. We need to put that awareness out there and work together to work through these things, and transparency is huge, but awareness, and I keep echoing the same words that everyone else has said, but like I said, repetition is the mother of education.
One of the things we've been able to do in our department is just provide opportunities for folks to learn more about trauma-informed care, opportunities to learn more about how their own trauma affects how they do their work and how it can impact a client to get that work done. So we formed a trauma-informed care committee back in 2018 when the executive order was signed. And the best ideas come from our team, right? It's not leadership sitting around saying this is what we're going to do for trauma-informed care. We have a committee that they've actually built 8 of their own training, specific trainings for certain topics related to trauma. And they offer them throughout the year. I think they've offered them over 50 times so far right now. We've finally figured out how to record some of those so we can play them and folks can view them when they want. But we've also incorporated it into our performance plans. Folks are evaluated. It's an expectation. I know Daniel mentioned you kind of have to expect what you want to see as well, again, in a trauma-informed way. So managing in a trauma-informed lens does not mean you stop having difficult conversations with employees when a difficult conversation is necessary, right? I think that's how we learn, but it's how do we frame that conversation so people can learn from it and we can become better as an organization. So we've put it in our performance plans. I said before, we've included it in all of our policies, and we're just going to continue to do that. But it's an expectation for our employees as well, and I don't want to belittle that point. I think we get what we expect, and I think it's something that our team is really rallying to and performing to.
Thank you. Part of what it means for a state to become trauma-informed, we've heard a lot from our agencies and what's happening internal to state government, but there's a ton of work happening external to state government as well. And part of that was formalizing Trauma Matters Delaware. And so, Erin, could you talk a little bit more about what Trauma Matters Delaware is and what you're focusing on right now?
Absolutely. So just from the video from Alana mentioning that this kind of began at a brouhaha coffee place, and just, subject matter experts sharing best practices in an informal setting, and then making those steps to form a steering committee, making those additional steps to put, paperwork and vision and mission statements together to make it a formal 501c3 nonprofit in 2021. I whenever I have these chances to speak about Trauma Matters Delaware history, it goes actually beyond the 5 years. It goes almost a decade. And we're really honored to still have some of those original subject matter experts with us today on the board. We have many of the original steering group members on our board. And so we're just very blessed and very lucky to have so many folks who have committed their time and talents to this work, helping lift off now a nonprofit that takes policy, that takes procedures, that takes a lot of other, business pieces to make it work. But to be able to go and take those elements into, hospitals, into community serving organizations, into a lot of different places, and share the research, share the blueprint, share the other documents that kind of show this affects you, this affects your bottom line, this affects your staff, your employees, your teams, and use that in a way that really highlights the awareness piece, builds in the sensitivity and the responsive piece, and gets them to a place where they can be informed. And one of my mentors recently said, the best you're going to get in the human service industry is recognizing that imperfection meets or needs to meet effort. And I think what you've heard from a lot of the panelists today, what you've heard from the video, what you're going to continue to hear is we're here to make the effort needed in whatever capacity that is. And that's what I'm most proud of for Trauma Matters Delaware.
Thank you. You mentioned Deb as being a part of the original group. And so, Deb, your work in the trauma-informed care space has been critical, both in the trainings that you've done with agencies, in your work with Trauma Matters Delaware, and the work you do at Wilmington University, the work with our future workforce. Can you just talk to us a little bit about how you got started, why it matters, and kind of what legacy you're hoping to create with all of this?
I love the question, the thought that I might have a legacy actually to give or to make, to create. So I grew up in a family where there was a lot of trauma. And I've never actually calculated my ACE score because I don't want to know it. I know it's high. It's not 10 because none of my parents were incarcerated. Neither of them were incarcerated, but it's up there. And so my goal was always to figure out how to create families that were healthier than my family. So I went to school my degrees are in family science. My undergrad master's and bachelor's, master's, and doctorate are all in family science, because that was my goal, to create families that were healthier than mine. But the language never really, there was language around family strengths and what were strong families, but it was separate. There was a disconnect between unhealthy families. And it was unhealthy families were all bad, literally, and healthy families were good. And when in 2015, one of the original Brouhaha Coffee members, an adjunct faculty person at Wilmington University, and one of my colleagues came to my team and I and said, hey, there's this thing happening. We think it would be useful for undergraduate psychology students to know, because they're going to work in Department of Health and Social Services. They're going to work in the kids department. They're working in those lower level, entry level positions where there's a lot of stress and trauma and burnout. And how can we help our students be healthier and provide better service to their clients? And she said, it's called a trauma-informed approach, or trauma-informed care. And as soon as I learned about it, that bridged that disconnect between healthy and unhealthy, because it said individuals, families, and communities all have strengths, all have positive assets that they bring to the situation. They may not be healthy in strategies in all settings, but they've got strategies and they've got strengths. And if we can build on those and help them recognize and grow and see their internal assets and provide them some additional external assets, then we can create a society where there are healthy individuals and there are healthy families and there are healthy communities and organizations. And so my team and I were invited to a Trauma Matters Delaware steering group meeting, and we conducted a focus group with the people that were there. You saw Leslie Brower on the video. She was one of those initial members. Kate Brookins, who was with the courts, Eileen Fink at the kids department, and others who I don't remember who was there, but wonderful people. My team walked out of that focus group in October of 2015. In the parking lot, created the 3 core courses for undergraduate trauma certificate, because we could see that it was a movement that our students needed to know and be a part of. We were approved in 6 months later, and we launched our certificate for undergraduates in 2016. We don't always quite move that fast. That was 6 months from start to finish and launch. But in general, I think one of the things that I've tried to do and my team has tried to do is really be receptive to the needs of the boots on the ground and the people who are working in the field. And how can we help you with our science, provide better services, and be better professionals all the way around. We've also got a graduate certificate that we launched in 2020, right before COVID. I had to look up the dates because honestly, pre-COVID and after COVID, just everything kind of blurs together in between. But we did launch our grad cert in 2020, and it's on my list now to provide those as professional development, non-credit certificates for others who are not interested in college credit, but who want that knowledge and skill. So part of my legacy, as I reflected on that, is to create curriculum at Wilmington University that helps provide our current and future workforce to provide better services. We've got our Wilmington University's College of Education on board, our College of Health Professions and Natural Resources. We renamed it. I think that's the new name. Our College of Business on board. College of Technology, they're a little slow on the uptake, but they don't work with people necessarily, or they don't think they do, so they don't quite understand the importance. Trauma-informed AI. But my goal is to, before I leave, that would be my legacy, to have something in all of our colleges across Wilmington University so that they understand the importance. We also have training also for our faculty and staff. Our College of Education does annual trainings for our full-time and adjunct College of Education faculty on trauma-informed approaches. And then I've been blessed to be able to work with agencies at the state, the Crusaders at Department of Health and Social Services, one of whom is in this room, who is an amazing trainer, Tanya Warner, who's been a part of this movement since, what was it, 2018, 2019? 2017, thank you. Yeah, I've been blessed to work with some of the agencies in this room, and Department of Labor, who's not in this room, but who's also been, a very active participant, and then some of the community organizations. And so my goal is to, outside of Wilmington University, to plant seeds, to sow, show the boots on the ground, how we can bring science, how you've got that practical applied hands-on experience, that we can partner with science to provide better services all the way around. So that would be my legacy, is that we can create a world. We will never create a world without trauma, sadly, because even adverse climate experiences, those are always going to happen. But maybe we can create a world where those of us providing services to others provide them in a way that promotes the strengths of all involved, regardless of who they are and where they came from. So that would be my legacy.
Thank you. Before we move forward, you, Deb, and Aaron have both been involved with the working groups of Trauma Matters Delaware. And so, Aaron, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what some of those initiatives are, and Deb, add in some of the work that you've led in that space as well.
Sure. We have 3 working groups, all volunteer-led. The 3 titles are our Community Healing Work Group, Deb's Institutions of Higher Ed Work Group, and then we have a really long one, so there's a test afterwards. You have to get it right. It's called the Primary, Secondary, Vicarious Trauma and Resiliency Work Group. We shorten that and make it abbreviated. Dr. Jackson's laughing. But those 3 work groups all have, specific tracks that they go into. And so our Community Healing Work Group really targets our community service organizations, our faith-based organizations. You mentioned the boots on the ground. They love to host in-person events. And they have Afrocentric background with some Ubuntu circles and some healing practices that they offer. I'll let Deb speak about the institutions of higher ed. I might could rival you now and speak just as much about it. Almost. I'm getting there. She's passing the torch a little bit. And then our primary, secondary, vicarious trauma and resiliency work group really focuses on folks that have left workforce, or have left the college and entered into the workforce, and then meeting with HR departments, meeting with leaders who want to bring these trauma-informed strategies to their companies, private, public, whatever the case may be, and how do we do that? So those are 2 that I can share with you, and then I'll let Deb speak about the third one.
So our third work group is the Institutes of Higher Education work group, and that is an effort to bring individuals who represent all the institutes of higher ed across the state of Delaware to the table to talk about how can we bring trauma-informed training to our students, to our faculty, to our staff, across the table, academic, non-academic sides of the house, it doesn't matter. And we've been fortunate to build a system that has representation from all but one of our higher eds in Delaware. And so it's super exciting to have Del State represented, and Del Tech, multiple campuses of Del Tech, Widener University, Delaware Law School, University of Delaware, and
Now Goldie Beacon.
And Goldie Beacon, thank you. We had a space absent for a little while, but we brought people from Goldie Beacon back on. And like I said, we have people from both the non-academic side of the house and the academic side of the house, because those who work in student life, student affairs, academics, athletics, athletics have different issues, thank you, than those of us who work in the academic side of the house and vice versa. And so our goal was to address universities and colleges as a holistic system and students, faculty, and staff across the board.
Thank you. I want to pivot to talk a little bit about what happens before you get to higher education. And so, Terry, can you talk a little bit about your work in our K-12 schools, how that got started and where you are today?
Sure. So thank you for the question. Our work in our schools is really built around building a culture of care where students can have feelings of belonging and attachment, but truly feel connected, protected, and respected in our schools. And the design really started, it preceded the executive order. So initially, our Delaware State Education Association, along with the Office of the Child Advocate, and with support from Casey Family Programs, worked very hard to start planting some seeds, laying a foundation with teacher trainings on Saturdays and just building awareness and helping people understand the science of adversity and how stress impedes learning and the brain. And so when the executive order was signed, it was an opportunity to really build out, scale up that work. The Department of Education was happy, proud, I believe, to have the first opportunity to hire someone in that particular position to lead the work. And we realized early on, one, that we needed a strategic plan for the work, but more importantly, that our work was internal, but also external to support the LEAs, our local education agencies. Within the department, we started having onboarding sessions around trauma awareness, built into the onboarding process for new staff. So when new staff come on, they learn, they participate in the trauma awareness training with the brain architecture game and focus on understanding how stress and adversity impede development. From there, we practice a number of the strategies that were taking place in our schools. And so our ongoing professional learning for educators is really built around capacity building that reflects the developmental framework that the state has at play. So we tried to link policy and practice around awareness. At the awareness level, we focus on the neuroscience for trauma, understanding well-being and self-care, social and emotional learning, and mindfulness as a stress reduction strategy. We have linked our comprehensive school discipline plan with 6 strategies that are mapped across the developmental framework. So at the sensitive level, we focus on culturally responsive and relevant practices, equity and justice in our schools, and exploring how our own personal biases and historical trauma impact building relationships and supporting youth, as well as facilitating relationships with colleagues. At the responsive level, we focus on restorative practices and really building out opportunities for healing and recovery for young people, but also for ourselves. We recognize that we can't pour from an empty well, and so as adults, educators, we need to be well so that we can support and facilitate the growth of our students. And so, finally, at the informed level, we focus on policies and practices, reviewing codes of conduct, and strategies for building the systems that will facilitate our wellness. We recognize that we don't want to just jump in once an adversity happens. So we have built within our multi-tiered systems opportunities to promote wellness at the universal level, but also to build in core competencies for mental health literacy, as social and emotional learning, and ways to support young people in managing the life experiences, the challenges that come up, but also recognizing that we heal in communities. Malcolm X says that when you replace I with we, even illness becomes wellness. And so we build a wellness community where young people feel comfortable and competent to reach out to adults and peers to get the help that they need in times of distress.
Thank you. And so, Zach, I want to come to you next as our youth advocate today. I would love for you to talk a little bit about your own experience. You can talk on campus, off campus, and what's most important to you for the other decision makers at this table to understand.
Thank you for asking me that question. I first want to start off with my own experiences, and I kind of want to start that with just saying hurt people hurt people. I want to say that even before we kind of understood what trauma was and the depths of it and how that can affect people and their behaviors, we felt it before we knew it. I know my time period in middle school, high school, I had friends that had went through things at home, and I've watched how it affected them in their own lives and how it affected their emotions, their feelings, and things like that before I knew what trauma was. Me personally, I've went through my own trauma, as we've all. I've come from a Haitian family household. So the way I was raised is very different than a lot of my peers were, and that created some level of separation between me and them. And I say to say that my trauma may be very different than somebody else's, but it always affects people differently. And someone had told me that your adulthood is basically your childhood inverted. So a lot of things that you go through in your childhood, you learn to kind of embody that in whatever it is, and that becomes your adulthood. That becomes the way you handle situations, the way you approach things, and your aspect on it. And from my own experiences, I've realized the importance of just being trauma informed, because when you make this transition time period in college where you go from 18 to 22, you go from fresh out of high school to, working your first career job and things like that. It's a lot of transition. It's a lot of transitions. It's a lot of growing up and a lot of different things, but you learn a lot about yourself. And I want to say that from my own experiences and just understanding how trauma really affects people, I've seen it in college. I've watched how people who have had different types of trauma in their past, it affects the way they interact with people in teams and groups when they work together and things like that. Some people may be less confrontational just due to things that they went through in the past. And all these things affect who we are. And to be more informed about it really creates the line between, okay, this is what I can change, this is what I can better, this is where I know it comes from, and different things like that. I had the opportunity of going to the youth summit a couple weeks ago, and it helped me out a lot because it really did educate me. It was many different organizations there. I don't know them all by heart, I'm sorry. But they educated on trauma, they educated on just what youth are currently going through and how can the state help with that. And I really do think it's what we talked about earlier about just being aware and really starting that conversation and continuing the conversation even though it might be hard. Continuing the conversation even though we're still learning about just the boundaries of it, but continue that conversation so we can get to a better place. Within the youth summit, I learned about advocacy, and I learned about how me just being a person that I am now today, I could make change and better the youth around me and honestly speak for them in places that they probably won't be in. And that's changed the way I looked at how I could speak for my peers and speak for others. And it honestly has shaped the way I want to kind of be an advocate for the people just like me, in a sense where I felt as though, certain things that we go through, it may just be, oh, that's just because I'm Haitian, or that's just because of this, that's just because of that. But honestly, we all go through our own type of things, and it honestly helps us to heal and be able to understand it for others. And I honestly think that one thing that I would definitely like to bring to the conversation is empathy, and really just showcasing the empathy and understanding a lot of different situations. We talked about how in the workplace, how trauma can affect us and how we had to learn how to basically be there for our team, be there for others, and understand it differently so we don't react the same way. I know some people, they go through depressive time periods due to the fact that, some of their loved ones may have passed around a certain time. That can affect them at work, that can affect them around their friends, that can affect them around family. If you don't understand how that's affecting them, you could react to it wrong. You could offend them, and you could actually make that time period a lot harder for them. But yeah, so I just wanted to bring those things to the table.
Thank you so much. And I think you kind of spoke to this in your response, but before we pivot to any audience questions, I'd love to ask anyone, we've been talking a lot about the state's work, right, to become trauma informed, this kind of institutional level of conversation, but would love to step back and just hear from each of you about why this work matters to you, both as an individual, as a manager, for your families that aren't, in this room, for your neighbors and others in the state?
We often talk about the power of whole child development in our education systems. But one of the things I think that this work really spotlights is that, one, we can't have, we need a lot of collaboration. We can't have whole children with fragmented supports. We also, and so that requires collaboration within our agency, but also across the state agencies represented. Many of us have projects that we're working on together. We also can't expect whole children without thriving families and resilient communities. And so for us, this has really become community work. We've extended professional learning beyond our education walls to partner with our community-based organizations, before and after care providers, because we want to wrap supports around young people to facilitate their growth. When we plant seeds in their lives, the beauty of kids is they go home and share that with the people they love. And so it's amazing to see young people who might learn a practice in yoga and how to regulate their bodies, but then share it with their family members or share it with their parents. And, some of those conversations have really helped build out the work too, beyond our school walls.
Thank you.
For the mic here. So I think for me, right, so I'm a parent of 3 wonderful children. I've seen them grow up, and I've tried to instill in them things that I wanted to instill. Wasn't perfect. All 3 of them will tell you that. They're my harshest critics. I look around at the youth and the families that we work with. And Terry, you very eloquently spoke about having to work with the families and planting the seeds and how it starts very young, right? So it's really, a lot of our agencies start working with families as they get identified to us, but the real work really begins the day the child is born, right? And how do we support a family to help those children meet certain milestones, right? And learn, and Zach, you eloquently stated about empathy, right? It's very true. A lot of the youth that we see, particularly, I'll talk about some of our juvenile justice students right now, is there is a move from what we would all have considered like about the community and what we want to see about the community and about others, and it's become very individualized, right? Violence has become something that's very acceptable as a tool for some of the young folks that we work with, and that's not what we're going for, right? We're going for something that is in a completely different direction than that. One of the things that we've worked with, trying to work on things that you can measure, right? Is there a different life skill that can be taught? Is there a different thought pattern that can be taught? When we're working with kids and thinking about, okay, maybe I took a car, right? So bad, not the worst thing I could have done, but it's bad. But what if that car belonged to a person that's their only way to get to their job? They don't live on the bus route. And now that person just lost their job because they can't get to work, and now they're unable to support their own family, and it's causing trauma there. I think for us, just having an awareness that everything we do is connected to the communities that we live in, having all of our workers understand that every client that we work with is part of a larger community, and just viewing, I'll go back to the Dr. Denker statement, right? Like, this is probably not the dream a person had when they went there, but this is what we need to work towards, a greater sense of the community and how we can support each other from 0 all the way up through graduation and well into adulthood.
So this work is important to me because it was my life. I talked about it a little bit, but it is unconventional for someone of my background to be sitting up here now. Parents with only a high school education, first generation college student, homeless for the majority of my life. First time I had a bed to myself was when I went to college, and I was in this little room with a roommate. It's a fun time, UD, Blue Hen. But even the the ability to navigate the college process alone was difficult. I sit here as next month I'll be 32 years old, but I'm a young gay black man who grew up in a very religious household. And it seems sort of like an oxymoron sometimes. My whole life does. And I do this work because I want, as we call it in my family, to reverse the generational curses that have preceded me and sometimes continue. One of the most important things that has happened to me recently is I became an uncle. I love my nephews. They are spoiled. They are my life. My sister probably hates that I spoil them so much, but I want their life to be better than mine was. And when I first got into the career field, I started as a community organizer because this is something Brian Stevens talks about, being proximate to the area in which you serve, wanting to understand what the impacts of today's society are. And decisions we make from my office, how do they get down to the communities that ultimately have to live and abide by those decisions? It is vitally important to understand that trauma compounds, trauma is relative. We cannot judge someone else's trauma off of our own trauma and say that's not really important. It happens constantly. And I think it is important to recognize that the work we do as a state, as an enterprise, as a society, as a collaborative culture, that collaboration Terry talked about, is vital to changing life outcomes and unlocking the limitless potential of so many people. Last and not least, the reason I do this work is because we need to build community resiliency. You're not going to wake up and everything be okay, but I sure would like to make sure you wake up and have the opportunity for everything to be okay. And we have to provide that to you.
I think one of the reasons I do it was because the evaluation data says it makes a difference. When we were training the DHSS workers and then they were doing trainings, and the individuals whom they were training were writing things like, I learned that I've become jaded since taking this job, and I don't want to be that person. That's not who I am. Or when one of their employees wrote, you've seen the Nadine Burke-Harris video where she talks about a bear in the woods and running from the bear. I've been the bear to my son. I'm the bear that comes home to my 6-year-old son. And the rewards for seeing that the trainers realized it really is making a difference in the employees, with the employees at DHSS in those 3 divisions, just was so heartwarming and so exciting to me that that's what keeps me going, is just knowing that this ripple in the pond effect is making a difference in the world.
Did you want to
Yeah,
close us out, Zach?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one last thing about everybody's giving the reasons of why they continue to do the work that they do. I would say a reason why I started the work that I'm doing is I actually seen the change in my parents. I actually had a conversation with my parents. Being born and raised in Haiti, they have a very different mindset than I would being born and raised in here. Privilege, needs, wants is very, very different. But I had a conversation with them, and we actually were, and I used the vocabulary and different words that would be used to describe trauma and different things like that. And we were actually able to get to a point where my mom was able to kind of open up about her own trauma that she's never actually talked about. She's always had and kept it the way it was because, in her head, that's just the way it is, things like that. But we actually were able to talk about it, and she was actually able to express an emotion and really find out where it comes from. And she was actually able to open her eyes and realize how that shows within how how she is as a mom, how she is as a husband, how she is as a friend, different things like that. But for me as her son, to be able to open her eyes to her own trauma really inspired me, because if I can do it for my parents, I can do it for somebody else.
That's powerful. So want to pause here and take any questions from the audience. Maida, who's our other youth advocate in the room, who's also been leading a lot of the work alongside Zach, is happy to pass the microphone to you if you have any questions. So we'll just pause to see if there are questions from the audience for any of our panelists. I believe we also maybe can take questions online too.
I have the question. Gotta pull it up real quick. Hi, everyone. My name's Maida. I was currently a youth advocate and was one of the main, I guess, hosts, you could say, of the youth summit we had about a month ago. And it was something that we started planning in January after going to Washington, D.C. and meeting President Biden and his wife. We were there for it was national, right? Yeah, There was like 5 states there surrounding mental health work, and we wanted to bring it back to the state. So, yeah. And then, okay, my question. I have a couple, so I'm trying to figure out which one I want to ask. Let's see. I'll start with this one. How can individuals or communities support trauma-informed care efforts and advocate for its implementation in different contexts? So more so like us as advocates, how can we do more as young leaders? I know First Lady earlier said it took her 30 years to start. So the fact that me, Zach, and there's actually a group of us that are trying to do more. How can we do more, remain involved, advocate, use our voice, and get more work done?
You can keep the mic. We can pass that one. Yeah.
This is very concrete, and first to say youth advocacy is vital and important. Hold us accountable and know the policies that we're passing and how they impact you. And the perfect way to do that is everyone looks at the Delaware General Assembly website for all the bills that are coming down. That is wonderful and amazing. But us state agencies up here, we are largely regulatory in nature, and so the regulations that we propose also are vital to how we run programs. Bills tell us what to do, regulation tells us how we do it. And the implementation of that, what we do, is more important than what they are saying needs to happen. And so I always tell anyone when they're talking about how they can get involved, how they can help us, make sure what we are doing, the programs we're running, make sure you're analyzing that through a trauma-informed lens, and hold us accountable that we are looking at it through a trauma-informed lens. We'll appreciate it. The more eyes on it, the better.
Thank you.
There. Other question? Yep. Tanya. We just asked you speak into the mic so they can hear us online. Okay. Yep. My
voice So thank you all for all that you're doing. As Deb knows, this is a passion of mine and has been for quite some time. And we've talked about the different ways of communities and how, it really does take a village, and within that village is multiple communities. Within those communities, there are individual cultures, and a lot of that culture has normalized what has been happening. And there are, you say to yourself, it's a secret, you don't share it, things like that. And it starts really early. They are sort of priming the children to follow in that culture. And some of the things that I had been reading about talks about prior to school, where we have young 3-year-olds being expelled from daycare. And it's just mind-blowing that we have, and I'm not far-reaching or stereotyping, but there's a disconnect, it seems, to some of those who are doing our early care, and the need to start incorporating them more in that understanding. What is it that we can do to really start at an earlier age, prior to kindergarten, to get those who are caring for, our most vulnerable involved with this and understanding better what's happening with these children versus just expelling them?
Hi, Steve Yateman again from the Kids Department. So I don't have a broad answer for every situation, but I know that we've had a very successful partnership with DHSS, and we have a program called the Early Childhood Mental Health Consultants, and it was built specifically to address the situation that you're talking about. So there was a time, and still is a time, where 2 and 3-year-olds were getting expelled from childcare. I'm thinking to myself, it took me to like 9th grade to get expelled, right? So I don't know. It was like, what could a 2 or 3-year-old do to get thrown out? So they started this program. And the funny thing is, the program does not work with the child, right? It's what makes the program work. They work with the staff at the child care centers, right? These are these early learning centers to teach them how to work with a child like this, so that child does not need to get suspended or expelled. And I think the last data I saw, it was about 98% effective of when they get a call and they go into work with this child care center, the student that they had a problem with, the student that was going to be expelled, was not expelled and was able to remain in the program. So for us, it's not so much working with a 2 or 3-year-old. There's not a lot of talk therapy you're doing at 2 or 3-year-olds, 2 or 3 years old, right? But there's a lot of work you can do with a caregiver, with a parent, with a guardian, to teach them how to interact differently with their child so that child can be successful. In this case, we worked with the child care workers. There's also training out there for parents. There's a specific program called Parent-Child Interaction Therapy, where it's I wouldn't really call it family therapy, but it's teaching a parent how to interact with their child in a positive way. We find that most of the work that we're attempting to do in the children's department around parent-child conflict is based on the parents changing some of their behaviors so that the child can be more successful. It also includes work with the child. I'm not saying it's solely a parent thing, but that for me is one of the ways to start, is really addressing all of our workforces, right? Which, I'm sorry, I think we've kind of addressed what we're attempting to do. Is it perfect yet? No. I think on our scale, you saw the scale up there. I think we list ourselves as a department as trauma sensitive. We don't believe we are all the way, to the peak of the mountain at trauma informed yet, right? We're probably our harshest critics, but we know that there's a lot of work to do, and that's one of the things we can do. And I don't know if that answered your question, but that's one example of what we're attempting to do.
It doesn't in a way, because, and that is amazing. So thank you for all of that work. But that parent and child still goes back to that community with that culture. So that's what I meant by the village, because we can start with the caregivers and the parents, but I guess it's the community, that village, that also needs to be
I
kind
gotta
of
tell you,
incorporated.
and Daniel wants to speak. So we view a lot of the work that we do as giving folks that partner with us the option and the ability to make different choices. We've not cracked, the nut on, and how do we change what the expectation is, change what the expected behavior is in a community. So we're working individually with folks. I know Daniel wanted to go.
And I'll let Dr. Deb, she probably has a lot more to say on this, but I appreciate the follow-up, because that community lens is important, because I was raised in a community like that. You don't go to therapists, you don't go to psychologists, that's for the other people, right? Just call a thing a thing. So there's a program happening right now with our Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health and our Division of Public Health, which is embedding wellness workers into the community. It's not at scale. Would love for it to be at scale. Still talking about what expansion looks like, discussing targeted zip codes and areas for that interaction, and then there's constant iteration with that. It's fairly newer in terms of the program life cycle, but it's attempting to get at that piece of how do you engage community in its own health. And a part of this is the trauma aspect of health and wellness. And so it's we have our community well-being ambassadors with DSAM. We have a Healthy Communities Initiative, which is how do you engage communities in their own well-being. It's going to be a slow process, as we all know. Cultural change is, but it's something that as a department we're looking at, and now we're looking at how do we bring that together, because they're working in these two divisions. How do we make sure that's a department supported aspect and event as well? And I don't know if Terry and Deb.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it is very layered work. And so, for example, the community well-being ambassadors have been trained in the skills for psychological recovery, and they're using those 6 skills to support people in understanding their experience, but also problem solving and managing their reactions, understanding their triggers so that they can build the coping skills to change behavior. In addition, we've partnered across agencies to not only train a cadre of trainers on trauma awareness for our state agencies, but also for our communities. So there are a number of training opportunities and just capacity building opportunities taking place in our communities. And then lastly, I would say that the Office of Early Learning, along with the Delaware Institute of Excellence in Early Childhood, has had a number of our training courses quality assured to support our early educators. And so the hope is that this information is being provided on multiple formats. We have it in on an online platform as well as live courses, and we have a number of YouTube videos very accessible to the public, so anyone can at any point in time start practicing some of the very strategies that we know build and support the brain development. So strategies on regulation, information about how to build strong and supportive trust-based relationships, and then how that information is used to support our reasoning, problem solving, and coping skills.
Me and Deb was just talking, but I believe that this would be a good opportunity for youth advocates to play a role within the community. Kind of just being so that, well, being as though the fact that we are just a little closer to the youth, the generation, high schoolers, middle schoolers, and we understand how to approach them, and we understand them just a little closer, and we kind of know how to talk to them in ways that they kind of are more intrigued, or it's not, as boring or different thing like that, but really retain the information, and also just being as though the fact that, we're at a point where we can work closely with some of the organizations and things like that that would like to make that change within the community but don't really know how to. I feel like that would be a good area in which that, me and the other youth advocates, we should really sit down and talk about how we can help this area within the community. But I would love to work with a couple of different organizations and departments to kind of weave those two lines together. I think the biggest thing is the information and how to push the information out there so that they're retaining information and it's not in a place that they had to go too far for it.
Thanks, Zach. And Zach's example earlier about talking with his parents and getting his mom to open up and talk about trauma is the perfect way of talking about how you, as an advocate, can work in the community. We can also tap into community resources. People might call them key informants, but it could be somebody like barbershops and hair salons and nail salons. And I know there's work out there in training individuals in those service industries and pastors. We don't have religious institutions at the table here today, but religious organizations are key as well. And so there's lots of community workers out there, community employees, where we can start and again, similar to what Trauma Matters Delaware did, which was grassroots organization, do the community from the grassroots up. And having the youth advocates start the work would be phenomenal.
And the last thing I'll add on this is just giving folks in the community a pat on the back for what they're already doing. I would be hard pressed to go into a community that I'm not aware of. They're, at the individual level, what they're going through, to say, this is what I want you to do, but I'd like to listen at what you're already doing and give you a pat on the back and just let you know that maybe your language is a little different, but you're already doing a lot of things, and just connect the dots for them that way.
So I think we could take maybe one or two more questions, and then we'll transition. But I just want to add that, like, the answer is it takes everybody. It takes all of us at the table. I'm a better parent because I've been doing this work, like hands down, right? Like I at an early age, and I'm sure that's true for probably most of the people at the table. I'm a better daughter because I've been doing this work, and I can talk to my parents about it, and I can talk to my siblings, and I can recognize those things. Or even when you come into a room and you notice something's off, and you say, like, hey, are you okay? Can I help you? Right. That's what trauma, for me anyway, that's what trauma-informed care is all about. It's recognizing that we all have experiences, whether it's the person cutting us off on the road on the way here, or if it's a bigger traumatic experience that's life-changing for you, that affects us. It affects our reaction. It affects the way, we might respond. It affects if my email's late or if there's a misspelling in the word, right? Like, all of that stuff shows up. And for me, it's just about noticing it, reacting to it. And when that 2-year-old or that 3-year-old is reacting in a way that one might constitute expelling them, that is a trauma response to probably something that's happening at home or something happening in the daycare center, right? And that's they don't have words. That's how they express what's happening to them. And so for me, the more that people can understand that this is a response, and if I figure out what's causing the response, that child can thrive here, then we'll, be in a better place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Takes a village.
Hello, my name is Erica Kelly, and it is truly an honor and a privilege to be here. And I just appreciate everyone's transparency and sharing their stories. I know we've said over and over again that hurt people, but I do know that healed people heal people. And so, like, your story just really, really touched me. And when we talk about youth advocates and what we can do, I think we can all lead from where we are. So I think just continuing to do what you do and going home, loving your families, loving your friends, because it is a ripple on everyone that we touch. But my question is, so my experience, 20 years experience in New Jersey Department of Education, so I understand the whole regulatory aspect of it. I'm now more recently in a more consultative role, which I feel like has been where the magic has happened, because I've been able to do organizational assessments and have focus groups where different groups are able to truly be anonymous and share what they want to say. And when I think about the student that got expelled, it really spoke to me, because there was a focus group that I did where the teachers actually said their own bias. They sometimes see black boys as they have to quickly get expelled. And they do, and they treat black boys different than they do other children in the classroom. And so I would say it's not so much the child or the parent. A lot of times that's just developmentally appropriate behavior. We have tantrums. I know adults that still have tantrums. And then it's not best practice to expel preschoolers. And so my question is, as leaders of agencies, how can we ensure that we have a culturally diverse workforce that is able to understand, relate, and talk to the lived experiences of those and the communities that we served? And from what I have found, I have been most successful not because of my research, not because of my practice, but because of my lived experiences. And so I really feel like my life is a blueprint for others that look like me. But again, how can we ensure that the workforce is culturally diverse, culturally responsive, and that we not only can recruit them, but retain them? As a black woman, I was very, very intentional about my doctor was going to have to be black. He's Nigerian. And I'm in Delaware now. I live in Delaware now, but I lived in New Jersey, who has one of the highest maternal death rates. And so my experience is very different. So when I go in a hospital, in a doctor's office, I'm on alert. Our care is very, very different. They think that I can take more pain than other people can. That is the farthest from the truth. I am a highly sensitive individual, and any little prick, I'm hollering. I still close my eyes when I get a needle. But having a diverse workforce and my doctor being Nigerian, like he gets it, and I felt more comfortable having to have a C-section, an emergency C-section at that. But even with that, once he did the C-section, he was gone. My nurse was a Caucasian woman, and she wouldn't give me medicine. And I was just like, I need the medicine. No, you don't. And so again, I think, and even in just thinking about different workplaces that I've had, that it was just a different experience when I've had people there that looked like me and understood some of the just cultural differences that we experience. And even within the Black community, my fiance, he's Ivorian, he's African. So just culturally, it's very different. And so, you know, again, just how can we ensure that we do have those differences? Because if you don't, I think sometimes it's a little bit difficult to be empathetic because you're just so far removed and you just have no idea.
So I know there were a couple of questions there. I just want to respond. I sit on the Healthy Mother Infant Consortium for the state as well, and I want to respond to the maternal outcomes piece, and I'm sure there are other pieces there. But I just want to say I hear you, I see you. Like, giving birth was one of the scariest experiences of my life because I'm a Black woman, right? Having a Black doctor, making sure that I had a doula, all of those things are the only thing that made me feel safe in that space, because I spend my job looking at the numbers, and they're not positive. And so it's critical that we have workforces in every aspect, right, that look like us, and that where people can feel comfortable, right? It doesn't mean because there are Black doctors available, I have to have one, but I want to have the option to have one if that's important to me and important for my experience. The same with therapists. I know we've talked a lot about this. We now have 2 programs in the state that are social work, masters in social work and behavioral health, right? Like, it matters that we've developed these programs, and it matters that we're ensuring that anyone who wants to be in them can be in those programs. And these are topics that are relevant to lots of folks in the state. And I just want to thank you for bringing it up and honor what you brought into the space. So we'll pivot to the panel.
I hear you about the diverse workforce. I know one of the best things I believe about working at Wilmington University is we're an open access institution. Anybody who's got a GED or high school diploma can apply and come and earn a bachelor's degree. And one of the things I struggle with is in higher education, we have a lot of barriers to people. You've got to get certain scores on certain tests, and I'd say very few of our programs are like that. We have some, but very few of our programs are like that. But the social work programs, the 2 masters in social work, I'm 99% sure there's barriers. So that's one of the things we struggle with in higher ed. And so that I'm excited to work at WMU, which we serve at least in our doctoral program, we have more than 50% minority students. We've got in some of our master's programs similar practice. So we have a record of really attracting and retaining and helping them graduate. My motto is leave no one behind, but help people as I can so that they can be successful. But that's one of the things we do struggle with in higher ed is the barriers and the roadblocks that we put up for people. But I do recognize that it is important to have a diverse workforce. In the trauma work, we teach about the gender, historical, and cultural trauma and the fact of cultural humility. And probably my best teachers were those 3 divisions at DHSS who really helped us shape that training and help shape our thinking and shape what we put into that training. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate them. So shout out to the 3 divisions at DHSS for being my teachers and being willing to teach me.
I just want to add that I'll go back to the beginning of your question or just response and talk about the power of organizational safety and trust-based relationships where educators can reflect on their practice, but openly acknowledge that we are humans. And when I acknowledge my own humanity, I make room for other people's humanity. And I think that's where the culture of care work starts and ends, right? That we have to make room, make more opportunities for us as adults to recognize how our personal experiences and biases interact, come into play in our relationships with young people. When we begin there, then we can open up the conversations and even our own, looking at our own behavior and being able to say, there's room for change and I can make that change. But I make change, I confront change in support of communities. And so we've got to build the organizational safety where those conversations can take place and people can start making those, having those conversations and making those changes in their interactions with students.
The only thing that I will add is if you want a culturally diverse workforce, if you want a culturally competent workforce, you need to make sure you're getting individuals who can relate to the community that you'll be working with. And I mentioned it earlier. We're very intentional on hiring people with lived experiences within DHSS to the best of our abilities as well, removing some of those barriers that we know exist. Degree requirements. Experience is probably a better barometer in some cases. Looking at where people go to school, right? A lot of folks are looking at the name of the institution instead of the skills that you gained while you're at the institution. Is important. We require a diverse hiring panel. If you're hiring for a certain position, you want to make sure individuals are on that panel who can relate to that position, and it's not just a monolithic approach. It's not all Daniels. I mean, but it's not all Daniels on the panel, or it's not all Alana's or Terry's. Like, we're making sure we are diverse, and actually that's a requirement of the state in a lot of for a lot of positions, that you do have a diverse panel, that you do have a certain applicant number. You can't close unless you get a certain number of applicants that have applied, and then after they've applied, you have to have a certain composition of people to interview that applicant. So the state is making a lot of progress in that regard as well. And then the other thing I'll say is just universally, what I like about Wilmington University, I got my master's from Wilmington U, undergrad from UD, master's from Wilmington, but they are moving to more, and a lot of IHE, Institutions of Higher Education, are moving towards more of a micro-credentialing framework where you don't need a 4, 2, 3, 7-year stint in a university to come out trained, qualified, educated. We are gearing certificates to the field you want to work in. It's less expensive, it's less time consuming, and it gets directly to the point. And so I think as a industry, moving towards actually giving people the skills they need quicker will help us get more qualified people in.
So thank you, Daniel. And I'm going to have you hold the mic as we close out. So we're just going to go across the semicircle here. Thank you all for being here and for your questions. And I'm just going to ask each of our panelists if they could leave us with one final thought going into the afternoon, thinking about the conversation we had today. What would it be, or what would you hope to be true for our state moving forward? So we can start with Daniel.
I said it earlier, the reason why I do this work and what I hope to be true is that we build a state with community resilience and community opportunity.
I think I go back to what I said at the very beginning, right? Was whenever you see someone, and if you're teaching someone, if you're teaching our employees, if you're teaching students, if you're working with someone at a community agency, just have them view everybody else that they come across as a person that has a dream, has their own path, has their own trauma, and that they are able to see them for who they are right now. I mean, you can't make a meme out of it, right? But there's, everybody's got a story, and you need to acknowledge that everybody that we come across as an employee, a teacher, a policeman, a social worker, the person you're talking to has a history, and we need to recognize it.
I just want to say, as a nurse, I'm sorry that you had that experience. That at that time, that should not have ever happened to you, and that breaks my heart. So I just want to say, as a last check-in with your teammates. Check in with people, especially when you know and you've heard that there's been a situation. It doesn't take much to send a text message. It doesn't take much to pick up a phone and say, "Hey, I'm just checking in with you. Are you doing all right? If you need anything, I'm here for you." I may not have all the answers, but I will try to get you to someone that can help out. But just awareness and just checking in with people, because sometimes just that acknowledgement can mean the world to them, to know that someone cares.
I would say that our trauma-informed care work is compassionate care work, and our schools are just blessed. We're thrilled to partner with students and families and communities in building hope and futures for young people. And more than anything, I think one of the biggest thrills is that our work has moved from trauma-informed to be resilience-oriented. And we're focusing on positive childhood experiences and the strengths that we know will build not only stronger students, but stronger communities.
I would like to leave 2 points. One is, I feel like from this conversation, I think we can all agree that there's strength in vulnerability, and I believe that's a bigger message that we should be pushing, in a sense, to allow people to open up and understand that that's what we share in common: the vulnerability and the trauma in between us. And just the last thing is, just be the person that you needed. If we all just think about the person that we needed, if we think about our trauma in a way that we don't want to see somebody else go through it, I feel like it could make this state a better place.
I love Zach. I know. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I was thinking, I want to go back also to something I said, which is we all come with strengths, and we all have learned how to advocate for ourselves. Maybe not in the most healthy ways in every setting, but this 3-year-old who was advocating for themselves, that behavior was a message, a way to communicate, and that strength was that child was trying to communicate and advocate for themselves. And so if we can just keep in mind every behavior, every word, everything we do is a communication, and we all are coming with strengths. And so if we can see past what our perceptions are and our lenses and our traumas, and try and look at the person and their story, then we will be able to see them and for who they are and for what their dreams were and for what their strengths are, and then can help them recognize and build upon those.
I don't know what else there is to say. Everybody kind of hit the nail on the head, but I will, if you've heard me speak before, my last point that I always tend to try to make is just a message of gratitude. I'm a young mother of 5-year-old twins, and I'm just so grateful and thankful and hopeful that all of this work will impact my kids' future.
So thank you all, our panelists here today, not just for being on the panel, but for the work that's happening in your spaces and that you're leading. Thank the audience for being here. And my final message is just a message of hope when I think about where we go next in our state. It's a hopeful place. There are lots of traumas that can be prevented, and trauma can't be prevented, right? It happens every day. But if we can leave with hope, if we can lead with hope, right, then to everybody's point, we'll be in a better place. So thank you.
Mike, I was like trying to pass you.